development, which took place in Cairo in 1994. National Treasury CS Ukur Yatani and the UNFPA Executive Director Dr. Natalia Kanem also took part in the Power March at Uhuru Park. The conference represents a call to action to achieve zero unmet need for family planning, information and services, zero preventable maternal deaths, and zero sexual and gender-based violence and harmful practices against women and girls. All right, let's now have that discussion and that upcoming summit that is set to start tomorrow. And joining me in studio, I'll start with my far left, that is Esther Achieng. She is the Executive Director, Kenya Female Advisory Organization. Next to me is Mabenge Ngom, who is the United Nations Population Fund Regional Director for West and Central Africa. Thank you very much for joining us here on Bottom Line Africa. I'll start with you. What exactly is the agenda of this summit?
Well, as you said earlier, 25 years ago, 179 head of state and government met in Cairo, in Egypt, to set a very ambitious but very simple agenda. That's what I call a human agenda, an agenda that addresses, the issue of maternal mortality, the issue of child marriage, the issue of access to family planning that is incredibly important for women's life and women's health, women's rights. And related issues such as migration, population data, planning, to really address the need of the people around the world. For instance, one of the targets was to make sure that everywhere around the world that we have no more than 75 women who die when giving birth for every 100,000 live births. And today, unfortunately, despite the incredible progress we have seen, we have a large number of women dying when giving birth. For instance, in West and Central Africa, in countries like Sierra Leone, maternal mortality rates are above 1,300. In several other countries in the region, the maternal mortality rate at least 10 times the target we set in Cairo. We have made also progress with regard to child marriage by gaining 10 points, but we are still facing a terrible situation, especially around the Lake Chad Basin or the Sahel and across Africa. And we know what it means for a woman to be married at the tender age of 13, 14, 15, when your body is not ready, what it means for your education, what it means in terms of loss of productivity, and what it means also in terms of your future in one line. We also agreed that in 1994 that we needed to achieve what we call universal access to family planning as a woman's right issue, a woman's health issue. But still up to now, in some places in Africa, access to family planning is extremely low, despite the fact that we have made a 25% increase in terms of access to modern contraception. Okay. But in some places in Africa, as I mentioned earlier, we are still at a very, very low, around 6 in some countries, 9 in some places. In average, women do not have access to family planning so they can have a better control over their body, over their health, over their life, with incredible implication for Africa as a whole, but also for the world.
All right. I'll come to you, Esther. We're taking 25 years later to assess the progress. Is it too late? Should we have done this earlier?
It should be something which is real time, because every day people's lives continue and people will continue to have reproductive health issues. So one of the things that we are looking at is that if we are not engaging on on these issues and as an everyday issue, then we keep on leaving so many people behind. One of the things which we're looking at is that how do we then have the data revolution include those who are left out? 25 years ago, we were not talking about issues which related to issues, for example, of women and girls with disability. Do we have data which can show that how many women and girls with disability are included in the conversation? We are talking about the issues of sexual orientation and gender identity issues, which is a challenge even speaking about in our contexts of African culture, which is a conversation which we are saying everybody is human and everybody has a right to access quality health services. So part of the conversation is that we have moved eons ahead, and it needs to be a conversation where government takes care of all its citizens. And we still find that even though we speak, we still find that women, particularly women and girls in rural communities, are left out because we do not have the requisite services, because sometimes also we still do not have the adequate budgetary allocations to ensure that we can get those services at the community level where they're at. So even whilst we speak, we are having this agenda on universal health coverage. But for us, we say that do we need coverage or care? Because care is more important because it will reach the needs of those community members and at individualized level. So it is important for us to start rethinking our strategies to ensure that we reach out to those who we still leave behind.
I like what you've mentioned. Is it coverage or care?
Yes.
And I'll just pick it up from there because you mentioned access to family planning. For example, I know of an area that, yes, they have access to family planning, but they don't really know how to use family planning as it is supposed to. You're finding parents giving children contraceptives for the sake of them not giving birth. But then at the same time, are they protecting them from STIs, STDs, and such issues? So then how do we ensure that as much as we tackle some of those issues, we just don't tackle them, but we tackle them to an extent that those that are receiving such care know what they're doing? You?
Well, I think you're right. I think one of the areas where the United Nations Population Fund is really, really investing is access to information. Access to the right information, access to quality information, so that people across the board can make the right choice and the right decision. This is fundamental in the work of the United Nations Population Fund. And everywhere around the world, we really work 24/7 to make sure that young people, adolescents, women, people living in the most remote area have access to the information as a first level. The second is to make sure that who needs service have access to quality services, voluntary quality services. And we also strive to make sure that there is continuity in the availability of the quality services. So we work also in helping parents, helping young people, helping leaders, community leaders, support this agenda of information, honest, credible information that will enable people to make the right choice.
All right, so then, Esther, from where you stand, what do you think are the possible outcomes of this conference?
It's possible that we'll start having real conversations, and so that even based on the controversy, then conversations of who is left out then becomes more important to us. So that when we are saying that we look at population, our population is not homogeneous. How do we then ensure that in our diversity, we are then inclusive of the different population and plan for them effectively so that they get the quality kind of healthcare that they deserve? Because we say that everybody is a taxpayer in their country, wherever they come from. So if I pay tax, then I deserve to get services from the tax that I pay. So part of it is that one of the outcomes is that we want to see a more human rights-centered approach in investment in healthcare, particularly for us at the community level, so that it's not a conversation centered within major cities. It must be a conversation which then include the needs of certain things which are left out. And for us, one of the things which we're looking at is that, for example, in what we call the essential healthcare package, which countries are supposed to be looking at to invest in health, how many countries have left out sexual reproductive health rights? How many countries have left out gender-based violence? And how many people have left out issues of palliative care in the essential healthcare package, which then is supposed to offer for us quality services? So part of this is that we leave out things which we need in planning, and then that means that constantly services is dependent on other partners. So unless we start looking at those basic services, which for us we say should be at community level, then we keep on leaving all these issues out. So for me, one of the outcomes is that who is investing in primary health care and who is investing in the community health strategy, so that we support systems which then are more preventive than curative in nature, and that community members have a voice in all their diversities and spaces at that community level.
All right, Mabenge, now the faith community in Kenya views the summit as a mere facade, unacceptable, for entrenching unacceptable practices, international and international laws, advance abortion, homosexuality, and other illegitimate practices. Allow me to refer to this tweet that was tweeted on October 15th by the Denmark Embassy in Kenya and Somalia, and it read, "Final countdown for the Icpd Nairobi Summit. We are looking forward to a lauded 3 days of discussions, dialogue, and expose on women empowerment, sexual and reproductive health and rights, access to family planning, sex education, LGBT rights, women's and girls' rights, and much more." Maybe if you can tell me, what do you think about this? Is this the faith communities in Kenya, right?
Well, I would say that it's going to be an open conversation around how do we move forward the ICPD agenda that had been sealed, as we say, 25 years ago. In between, a lot has happened. And let me just mention one key point. Addis Ababa, in 2017, the African head of state and government came up and declared the year as the year for harnessing the demographic dividend. And if you refer to the roadmap itself, especially on this fourth pillar, you'll find the issue of rights and choice. So the conversation in Nairobi should not be about going back to the traditional conversation, but should be about what can we do together to move together and to accelerate the path the Africans themselves have decided. That is harnessing the demographic dividend, addressing the issue of child marriage, family planning, girls' education, that is vital, but also to provide services, as my colleague have just said, to those who need services, for their, to live a better life. So Nairobi should be about scaling up, it should be about fast-tracking the progress, should be about making sure that women, wherever they are across the continent, in the most remote area, have access. For young people, wherever they are, they have access to information.
Okay. All right. And, the United Nations Populations Fund mission is to deliver a world where every pregnancy is wanted, every childbirth is safe, and every young person's potential is fulfilled. So then, how do we implement this and still ensure that the African and religious moral values remain intact, Esther?
In the African context, we talk about the African context where sexuality was taught in certain spaces. I'll talk about the low cultural context where the grandmothers taught girls. In the low cultural context, we had traditional spaces called Siwinde, where you are taught about your body and issues about your sexuality. For boys, the grandfathers and uncles taught them in what we call duels. And I think this is cutting across all the different spaces. So even in our own African context, there were spaces where you're taught about your body and your sexuality. And we're very open in the African context. So this issue where we are thinking that, starting to say that it is some foreign thing, that is a fallacy in my opinion, because we had those spaces in our own cultural spaces. So if we even go back to our own cultural traditional spaces, there were spaces where body rights were taught. There were spaces where you're taught about body agency, how to take care of yourself, and the issues of body autonomy. So those were spaces which existed, and we have documentation to that effect. So part of the whole thing that we are saying that it is something which is foreign, is something which we said people need to go back and look at their old cultural practices, which then created spaces for conversations on body issues and agency at that particular level. So part of what we are looking at is that some of the pushback or resistance is that it keeps on drawing us back, yet we are complaining about, one, adolescent pregnancies, but no one is talking to adolescents on how to take care of themselves. So part of it is that if we want to really speak about the challenges which are facing us, then you'd better open up spaces and create those spaces to speak to our adolescents and young people about what the challenges they face and grow. So part of it is that for us, as institutions who come from spaces where sometimes no knowledge is found, then adolescents will experiment. So even when you're talking about comprehensive sexuality education, it is not something which is new. It is just that we are making it more of a curriculum, yet in our own cultural spaces, comprehensive sexuality education existed. So part of it is that we would like to tell all parties to open up and ensure that the spaces for conversations are not closed by your own biasness and your own heteronormative practices and beliefs. Open up spaces because in our own African contexts, we had spaces for conversations. And if we go back to those spaces for conversations, then we'll have a very easy time where knowledge is shared and knowledge is passed and people are mentored. But the unfortunate bit is that we are losing out on potential dividends for our communities when we don't give the right information to adolescents, when we don't give the right information and then services to young people. And then they get left out, and that is why we are seeing the challenges we are facing today of new infections in spaces where we should have had no infections.
Okay, so what I'm getting from you is let's be open-minded.
Yes.
All right, Mabinga, even as we conclude, what is your expectations from this?
No, I agree with my colleague. If we invest more in data and evidence, I think we have the chance to narrow the gap, to address the issue of the polarization. Second, I think we need to continue the conversation with the various groups, religious leaders, traditional leaders, families, and so on, so that we build a much better understanding and address the asymmetry of information that is behind most of the misunderstanding. So our expectation will be to build on the successful experiences. For it comes to religious leader, for instance, we brought in Jamena 1,500 imam, 3 days. And at the end, they come to the conclusion that Islam is not against family planning. I think we need to promote this kind of platform for conversation, for sharing. But once it happens, what we need now in Nairobi to make sure that everywhere around the world that people know that Islam is not against, and we use the same process to scale up. We have done the same for traditional communicators who have been able to use very sensitive language to talk about very complex issues. So we really need to build on the success, share, use data and evidence, and we move forward. But 25 years after Cairo, women are still dying. We're still marrying our girl at the tender age. And we're still having millions of women around the world who want family planning and who do not have access. This is why we are here in Nairobi.
Okay, allow me to end this conversation here because we're out of time, but thank you very much, Mabinga Ngom, who is the United Nations Populations Fund Regional Director.